theorists are reacting directly to that idea that it must have been a conspiracy, because it's too horrible to think that the person that William Manchester called the wretched waif could just do this and change the course of history.
But for the larger American public, somehow they don't want to believe that this pathetic Oswald just happened to walk on the stage and kill Camelot and kill Kennedy.
The idea that one lone nut took out the most powerful person in the world.
JFK, the leader of the free world, brought down by who? Lee Harvey Oswald, just some nobody? There's this mismatch.
It's a big historical event, and people assume that a big event must have had a big cause.
Cognitive dissonance. That is, we want the size of the event to be matched by a cause that's equally of that size. So
it's much more rewarding, in a sense, to assume it was part of a big plot, and a big plot then makes it worthy that your president was killed.
It's also very possibly that some other people were involved as well.
Who?
I don't know.
See, this is the problem.
But wait a minute, why is it a problem? If you don't know who they are, just because you don't know who they are doesn't mean they didn't exist.
He did have three things right, and I got to hand it to Oliver. He had three things right. He had the date of the assassination correct, November 22nd, 1963. He had the victim, John F. Kennedy, and he had the location, Dallas.
But it wasn't pristine. It was flattened.
Barely.
Beyond that, Oliver Stone's movie, JFK, is one continuous lie.
We talked about the Kennedy assassination. A portion of the interview was not broadcast at the president's request on the grounds, he said, of national security.
The man holding the rifle in this photo is Lee Harvey Oswald, who went on, of course, to kill John F. Kennedy.
I'd like some legal representation, but these police officers have not allowed me to have any.
Could it just be that we can't wrap our minds around the idea that the most powerful man in the world could be taken out by a nobody?
But I can wrap my mind around that, sure.
Tested and tested and tested.
Well, sort of.
But not in this case.
I don't believe so in this case because of all the evidence around Dealey Plaza that day.
There's a lot of shenanigans.
I don't know what this is all about. Kill the president.
In Case Closed, Gerald Posner supports the magic bullet theory in the assassination of this president. Tony.
Who's Kennedy?
Yes.
I just don't like when people say they know one way or another.
Yeah.
Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
I'm one of those who accepts the conclusion of the Warren Commission.
I'm just a patsy.
Not only that, the way they found it on the gurney, on Connolly's gurney when he was in the hospital. Oh, look, we found the bullet. Here it is. It's ridiculous.
If you look at the physical evidence, there's nothing to suggest anything other than Lee Harvey Oswald shot the President of the United States in 1963.
There is Lee. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
But I don't think that they or me or anyone else is always absolutely sure of every thing that might have motivated Oswald or others that could have been involved.
Anybody that knows anything about hunting or guns or any person that I know that I've talked to, like, is this shot anything? Everyone says no.
What we really have is a sort of a national obsession.
Well, do you know that for sure?
No, I do not know that for sure.
The guy that dies goes to heaven, and God says, you've been such a good fellow your whole life. I'll grant you one which you can ask me anything. He said, all right, who killed Kennedy? And God said, it was Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone using his own Carcano rifle. And the guy goes, this goes higher up than I thought.
Everybody's interested in it. Some people even think it's fun.
Some people would like to know who killed their president, why he died.
Welcome to episode 1 of What Happened to JFK? The Devil is in the Details. We're going to start with a simple premise. Did the Warren Commission prove that Lee Harvey Oswald was on the killing floor at the killing time? Or did the evidence show something else? If the accused was not in the 6th floor sniper's nest at 12:30 p.m., then there was no case against Lee Oswald. Conspiracy theorists were not the only skeptics in this story. On almost every major point of evidence, there were higher-up figures that expressed opposing views. These included, among others, 3 Warren Commission members, President Lyndon Johnson, and even the unscrupulous FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. I'll get back to them in due time. For now, let's take a quick look at Chief of Police Jesse Curry, the face of Dallas PD's investigation of President Kennedy's murder. Here's a look at Curry in action in the aftermath of the assassination.
Are there any other suspects linked with Oswald?
No.
How would you describe his mood during the questioning?
Very arrogant. Has been all along.
Has he admitted that he was in the building at the time of the shots were fired?
Well, we know he couldn't deny that. We have witnesses.
In the early days, Curry expressed his confidence that they had arrested the right man.
Is there any doubt in your mind, Chief, that Oswald is the man who killed the president?
I think this is the man that killed the president.
But this would change. Here's an excerpt he gave to the Dallas Morning News in 1969. Former Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry said Wednesday he is not sure to this day whether Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin of President John F. Kennedy. "I'm not going to express my opinion," Curry said at a press conference. "I'm not sure about it. No one has ever been able to put him, Oswald, in the Texas School Book Depository with a rifle in his hand." Now, some would consider that was expressing an opinion, but that aside, those are 2 big bombshells. The first is Chief Curry's deviation from the official script of Oswald's ironclad guilt. The second, that they couldn't put him in the right spot with a gun, bears directly on the premise of this episode. Vicki Adams was born in San Francisco in 1941. At the age of 11, she was deserted by her parents. Becoming a ward of the state of California, she was raised in foster homes until she finished high school. Upon graduation, she entered the novitiate at St. Martin, Ohio, in the Ursuline Order. She later moved to Atlanta and became a 6th grade teacher at the Immaculate Heart of Mary School. In 1962, she went to Dallas, Texas, and taught again, this time at St. Monica School. After an internal reflection of her religious beliefs, she decided to pursue new avenues in her life that didn't involve Catholicism. She finished the school term at St. Monica's in 1963 and soon after applied for a job at the Texas School Book Depository in Dallas. The first lesson in grasping the events of November 22, 1963, is to study the immediacy by which authorities declared Lee Harvey Oswald as the one and only assassin of President John F. Kennedy, the methods that were employed in countering opposing evidence, and how all other possibilities were nullified. There were 2 basic types of witnesses in the JFK case, positive and negative. A positive witness was one with information that corresponded with Oswald as the lone killer. A negative witness was one with contrary evidence. Say, for instance, one of the several bystanders that thought that gunshots came from somewhere other than the 6th floor sniper's nest. In a normal homicide investigation, no credible evidence is discounted. All relevant material is gathered, scrutinized, prioritized, and followed up on. President Kennedy's death was never treated like a normal murder case. Oswald was dead within 2 days, but the public needed a legitimate accounting of the murder of their president. 22-year-old Vicki Adams was the epitome of a negative witness. Her testimony gave fits to certain Warren Commission staff. For what if Vicki said was true, it threw a sledgehammer in their case against Lee Oswald. Miss Adams would always stick to her story, and what followed for her was something she never could have imagined. The Warren Commission contended the following. On November 22, 1963 at 12:30 p.m., Lee Harvey Oswald was at the southeasternmost 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository, firing fatal shots at the president.
President Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally were both struck by the gunfire as their limo was headed westbound on Elm Street. Their spouses in the same car, fortunately, were not harmed. At the same time, motor officer Marion Baker was headed northbound on Houston Street, half a block and around the corner from the president. Baker, hearing the shots, headed for the book depository straight ahead after seeing birds scatter from the rooftop. Lastly, book depository superintendent Roy Truly was standing in front of his workplace, having just watched Kennedy pass by. The next few things happened at the same general time. Officer Baker, seen at the bottom right in the green circle, parked his motorcycle and ran straight up the depository stairs, pushing people out of his way. Roy Truly, at Baker's left, spotted Baker, recognized him as a police officer, correctly surmised that he was aiming to get to the top of the building, and accompanied him inside. And Lee Harvey Oswald, seen on the 6th floor here, wiped down his weapon, crossed the floor, carefully hid his rifle between boxes of books, and exited the 6th floor down the rear northwest stairwell. Less than 90 seconds after President Kennedy was mortally wounded, our three fateful figures crossed paths in the 2nd floor lunchroom. Although Truly indicated to Officer Baker that Oswald checked okay as an employee, the encounter quickly added to a pile of evidence against him that included, among other things, Oswald exiting the building and not returning for a later roll call.
Case closed. Thank you for watching The Devil is in the Details. And I joke, of course, because our scenario has barely been sketched. There were, in fact, many other participants. Let's start with Victoria Adams.
Vicki Adams worked for the Scott Forsman Company, whose offices occupied the 4th floor of the book depository. That same day and time found her, co-worker Sandra Styles, Elsie Dorman, kneeling on the floor taking footage with her husband's camera, and their supervisor Dorothy Garner, looking out their office window at the president's motorcade. Vicki and co-worker Sandra Styles heard gunshots, saw commotion, and decided to follow the action outside. Vicki testified that they left the window between 15 and 30 seconds after the gunfire and arrived on the 1st floor by way of the rear stairwell in no more than a minute. This was virtually the same time when suspect Oswald would have been making his way down those same wooden stairs for his rendezvous in 90 seconds with a police officer and the building superintendent. Since Adams told authorities she neither saw nor heard anyone else in the stairwell, this posed an admitted problem for the investigating commission.
For Lee to have hid the evidence, crossed the floor, hurried down before the two girls, beat Baker and Truly to the lunchroom, and been found with a calm demeanor, as described by both men, strains credulity. For Lee to have descended after the girls, not be detected by them, and make his 90-second lunch date in the lunchroom, well, that too is also perilously next to impossible. Hear from the Warren Commission testimony of Motor Officer Marion Baker.
Representative Boggs, when you saw him, was he out of breath? Did he appear to have been running or what? Baker, it didn't appear that to me. He appeared normal, you know. Boggs, was he calm and collected? Baker, yes, sir. He never did say a word or nothing.
And from Superintendent Roy Truly.
Mr. Bellin, did you see any expression on his face, or weren't you paying attention? Truly, he didn't seem to be excited or overly afraid or anything. Sheriff's Deputy Eugene Boone was one of the officers credited with finding a rifle hidden on the 6th floor of the depository during a search of the premises after the assassination. Boone testified he squeezed through a slight space between some boxes and a wall. Then, I caught a glimpse of the rifle stuffed down between 2 rows of boxes with another box or so pulled over the top of it, and I hollered that the rifle was here. Lee Harvey Oswald did not just purportedly toss a rifle down on his way to his escape route. It was carefully hidden and covered up, which needs to be considered when trying to reconcile the timeline.
All of the Warren Commission testimony referenced in this video can easily be found by Googling Warren Commission testimony of and filling in the appropriate name. So what does all this mean?
After his arrest, Oswald told authorities he had been on the 1st floor eating lunch at the time of the shooting and had gone up to the 2nd floor lunchroom to get a Coke when he was encountered by Baker and Truly.
As we know, officials contend Lee was on the 6th floor shooting the president and came down to the lunchroom immediately afterwards. Victoria Adams put an unwelcome crimp in this already strained scenario, giving leeway to Oswald's first-floor alibi claim. With all of the damning evidence against him, which will be outlined in video 2 of this series, if Oswald were unable to be pinned to the killing floor, that simply wouldn't do for a case that was focused on him and him alone.
This shouldn't have been a problem, though. There were other witnesses whose testimony fit in with the Warren report scenario, including Victoria Adams' own conflicting statement. In addition to Motor Officer Marion Baker and Superintendent Roy Truly, 2 other employees helped nail down the time sequence after the gunshots. To render Vicki Adams uncredible, the Warren Commission pointed to the moment when she encountered William Shelley and Billy Lovelady on the first floor as the 2 men made their way back into the book depository, while Adams was on her way outside. Lovelady and Shelley stayed together in the immediate aftermath of the shots. Their recollection of time was different, however. In FBI interviews, Lovelady put the time they returned to the building after the gunshots at 5 minutes, and Shelley at about 10 minutes.
If we take Lovelady to be more precise at 5 minutes, then Vicki Adams left the 4th floor several minutes later than she thought. If we use Shelley at 10 minutes, it's not even close. Oswald could easily have made his way down those stairs well before Vicki Adams was upon them. Thus, they dismissed her statement. It's instructive to read the Commission's exact words, as I will cast aspersions on them later.
Warren Commission Report, page 154. They, Shelley and Lovelady, re-entered the building by the rear door several minutes after Baker and Truly rushed through the front entrance. On entering, Lovelady saw a girl on the first floor who he believes was Victoria Adams. If Miss Adams accurately recalled meeting Shelley and Lovelady when she reached the bottom of the stairs, then her estimate of the time when she descended from the 4th floor is incorrect, and she actually came down the stairs several minutes after Oswald and after Truly and Baker as well. Here we are in fast-forward movement, 12:30 p.m. After the gunshots, Shelley and Lovelady, seen at the bottom in orange, had been watching the parade from the top steps of the depository entrance and began their outside excursion. Vicki Adams and Sandra Styles were in a holding position at the 4th floor window. Oswald did his assassin cleanup chores before descending and was briefly accosted by Baker and Truly in the lunchroom. Baker and Truly dismissed Oswald and continued up the stairs toward the rooftop. Oswald bought a Coke from the vending machine, walked through the 2nd floor offices, down the east stairs, and exited the building by the front entrance. Vicki and Sandra Styles began their descent down the stairwell sometime after 12:34 p.m. and crossed paths with Lovelady and Shelley, who were just re-entering the depository. This last scenario is from the Warren report. It appears not only plausible, but likely what happened. In her own testimony, which we haven't yet examined, Vicki said she ran into Shelley and Lovelady on the 1st floor. Lovelady said he saw a girl on the 1st floor who he believed to be Vicki Adams.
We know that Shelley and Lovelady were meandering outside for at least 5 minutes, watching the chaos that ensued after the brutal assault on the President and Governor Connally, before returning inside the building. So the brief bump into each other was mutually corroborative and set the timeline straight as far as the Warren Commission was concerned. Why the controversy then? Vicki obviously made a mistake, right? Inquiring minds are asking what Sandra Styles had to say. Her and Vicki were joined at the hip on their way out the building. Sandra Styles wasn't called by the Warren Commission, but she would have a say at some point. And where exactly is the proof that Commission staff even considered Vicki Adams to be a threat in their case against Lee Oswald? Stay close. If you're unfamiliar with this story, things get a little more incredible than you might expect. There's a few twists at the end. I would go as far as to call them smoking guns.
It was 1967, a year of notable debuts, escalating wars, and protests in the street. It was 4 years after President Kennedy's murder. During a history class discussion on the Kennedy assassination, students were asked if they had read the Warren report. Barry spoke up that he had, and that he believed it. A fellow student named Terry prodded him to read more than the report, especially the 26 volumes of evidence that it was based upon. And occasionally Terry would ask him, "So do you still believe the Warren report?" This started Barry on a lifelong journey that found him leaving Kent State to pursue the truth behind JFK's murder, including searching decades for the elusive Vicki Adams, who had virtually disappeared shortly after her involvement in the case. In early 1967, Barry was introduced to her name in Mark Lane's book, Rush to Judgment. From the outset, he was intrigued by the notion that this young woman might have run down the stairs at the same time as the suspected assassin. Barry still believed in the Warren Commission, but Lane's allegations of commission malfeasance grabbed a hold of his thoughts. Barry began to do more JFK assassination research than schoolwork. The 888-page Warren Commission report is a purported summary of 26 volumes of hearings and evidence related to the Kennedy assassination. Warren Commissioner Alan Dulles once commented on its cumbersome size and readability. "If historians later want to read it over and work on it, well and good," he said. "But I don't think anybody would pay any attention to it to begin with."
We all know how that turned out.
Before the internet, this set of books wasn't the easiest thing to come by, but could be found at some libraries and universities, including Kent State. In the preface to Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment, historian Hugh Trevor Roper wrote about the frequent changes when comparing the same item of evidence between the 26 volumes of hearings and exhibits and the Warren Report. He referred to the phenomena as the quiet transformation of evidence.
We're about to get our first lesson on those transformations.
Barry Ernest had quietly joined a small, mostly unconnected group of people around the country that, contrary to what Alan Dulles predicted, did take on the arduous task of finding and digesting the testimony of 550 witnesses and other exhibits. Like Hugh Trevor Roper, they too discovered that much of the content in the supporting volumes conflicted with the Warren Report.
For instance, the morning in 1967 when Barry came across the actual testimony of William Shelley and Billy Lovelady and was startled by what he read. To be fair, the report never did say that William Shelley saw Vicki Adams on the first floor, only Lovelady, but the two men were together. Did only one of them see her? Either way, Shelley's testimony is informative. Assistant Counsel Joseph Ball led Shelley through his outside movements after the gunshots and then when he re-entered the book depository. Shelley said he saw employee Eddie Piper in the first floor shipping room. We'll take it from there.
Ball: "Did you ever see Vicki Adams?" Shelley: "I saw her that day, but I don't remember where I saw her." Ball: "You don't remember whether you saw her when you came back?" Shelley: "It was after we entered the building." Ball: "You think you did see her after you entered the building?" Shelley: "Yes, sir, I thought it was on the fourth floor a while after that." Ball left the Vicki Adams topic for the moment. 33 questions went by about other employees, 10 queries about chicken bones and fried chicken found in the building, and what was to become an infamous bottle of Coca-Cola. After 33 feints, Ball stepped in with a jab, giving Shelley a second shot at a different answer. Ball: "Did you see Vicki Adams after you came into the building, and did you see her on the first floor?" Shelley: "I sure don't remember." Ball: "You don't." Shelley: "No."
Okay, Bill Shelley said he didn't see Vicki Adams on the first floor 3 times. It's pretty clear his first recollection of her after he came back in the building was on the 4th floor, where her offices were. But the Warren report said the other Bill, Billy Lovelady, saw a girl he believed to be Vicki Adams on the first floor, right? Here's what Barry Ernest found when he read Lovelady's actual testimony in the supporting volumes. I'll also jump here to Lovelady's arrival back to the building.
Ball: "You came in through the first floor?" Lovelady: "Right." Ball: "Who did you see in the first floor?" Lovelady: "I saw a girl, but I wouldn't swear to it it's Vicki."
Sorry, I have to pause here, but it sounds like we walk late into this conversation. I saw a girl, but I wouldn't swear to it it's Vicki. Sounds like the response from one who was told, "We need you to swear that the girl you saw was Vicki." This was the first time she was brought up in Lovelady's testimony. Let's go back 2 steps and start again.
Ball, who did you see in the first floor? Lovelady, I saw a girl, but I wouldn't swear to it, it's Vicki. Ball, who is Vicki? Lovelady, the girl that works for Scott Forsman. Ball, what is her full name? Lovelady, I wouldn't know. Ball, Vicki Adams? Lovelady, I believe so. Ball, would you say it was Vicki you saw? Lovelady, I couldn't swear. Ball, where was the girl? Lovelady, I don't remember what place she was, but I remember seeing a girl and she was talking to Bill or saw Bill or something. Then I went over and asked one of the guys what time it was and to see if we should continue working or what.
The testimony ended shortly after that. Vicki Adams was not brought up again. First, Ball had asked who was Vicki and for her full name, and when Lovelady couldn't supply it, Ball quickly came up with it himself.
From Billy Lovelady's assertion under oath that he saw a girl that he couldn't swear was Vicki Adams, the Warren report chose to summarize him as a witness who saw a girl on the first floor who he believes was Victoria Adams.
A negative was quietly transformed into a positive. Here's another example. This is what the Warren report said regarding the time in which Adams left the fourth floor window after the shots.
Warren Commission Report, page 154, Victoria Adams, who worked on the fourth floor of the depository building, claimed that within about a minute following the shot, she ran from a window. Here's her actual testimony given to Assistant Counsel David Bellin. Bellin, how long do you think it was between the time the shots were fired and the time you left the window to start toward the stairway? Adams, between 15 and 30 seconds, estimated, approximately. This is a story about time. Timing is everything. Before we even factor in Shelley and Lovelady, the report changed Vicki's departure by changing her testimony, inadvertently or otherwise, by at least 30 seconds, buying Oswald more time to advance down before her, making it more possible for him to have been on the incriminating 6th floor. The mistakes, the transformations, always seem to add, not detract from this position.
I'm just a patsy. President.
A quiet transformation of evidence, and it gets much worse.
Consider Billy Lovelady's testimony we just heard. The odd exchange seemed to indicate there was a pre-interview about Vicki. I cannot prove Joseph Ball bullied Billy about his answers, but it is a fact there were off-the-record pre-interviews.
This is Warren Commission Assistant Counsel Howard Willens. Willens, along with several others, was very instrumental in shaping the narrative that came out of the report. A staunch advocate of the Commission's findings, Willens nonetheless provided some telling insights in his 2013 book, History Will Prove Us Right. He wrote that in early March of '64, the topic of pre-interviewing witnesses was a full-blown debate amongst staff, requiring several meetings and an ultimate decision by J. Lee Rankin, the number 2 guy below Chief Justice Earl Warren. Commission Special Assistant Norman Redlick had voiced opposition to the practice, writing, "An unrecorded interview with a witness creates the inevitable danger that the witness will be conditioned to give certain testimony when he is under oath." The overall investigation was split into components. Assistant Counsels Joseph Ball and David Bellin, 2 names you're already familiar with here, were the duo charged with identifying the assassin. David Bellin supported advanced interviews and was against having them transcribed.
Because that would mean we would know what they said.
Willens sided with the 2, writing, Bellin, arguments impressed me, especially because they were strongly endorsed by his senior counsel, Joe Ball.
I think they call that circular reasoning.
General Counsel J. Lee Rankin also sided with Bellin and Ball, giving the green light to, quote, interview witnesses informally in the exercise of their best judgment.
So where does that leave the depository gang in our story? Shelley said he did not see Vicki on the first floor. Joseph Ball extended the same courtesy to Lovelady that he gave to Shelley, allowing at least 2 tries at the same question. Despite those hints, Lovelady still wouldn't swear the girl he saw was Vicki Adams. Lovelady added that the girl he saw was talking to Bill or saw Bill or something. That is a vague statement that you think Joseph Ball would have followed up on, such was his interest. However, even with that dubious commission rewrite, this should all be a moot point. Maybe the Warren Commission was patching up a few holes in an otherwise shut and dry case with some creative writing. Very unethical, but not earth-shattering, not with someone as guilty as Lee Harvey Oswald. We still have Vicki Adams herself, who, according to her testimony, said she saw the two bills on the first floor.
Or did she?
So what difference does it make? And don't forget about Sandra Styles flying under the radar while the focus inexplicably remained on Vicki Adams alone. And while I have pointed out some serious commission misdirection, we still haven't arrived at our real smoking guns.
Barry Ernest's journey as a JFK researcher spanned well over 3 decades and involved many facets of the case. July of 1968 found him poring through documents and reports at the National Archives. He found an FBI interview of Vicki Adams taken just 2 days after the assassination. There was no mention in that interview of Shelley or Lovelady, not too surprising as the significance of that encounter probably wasn't known by either the agent or Adams, and the early affidavits tended to be on the shorter side. Barry trudged on, engaged in work perhaps only a handful of people in the country were doing at the time. In a different box of Warren Commission files, he found yet another interview of Vicki. This time it was by Detective James Lavelle. The Dallas PD detective was better known to most as the cop in the white hat who was handcuffed to Lee Oswald as Lee was slain by club owner Jack Ruby. His interview with Vicki occurred 2.5 months after the FBI interview.
You see, there was quite a bit of interest in what she had to say, and we're just getting started.
Detective Lavelle's interview was the first time Adams spoke of seeing a Mr. Shelley and another employee named Bill on the first floor. Everything else was pretty consistent with her previous accounts. This statement was taken 7 weeks before she would be deposed by David Bellin. Barry Ernest continued researching, and his suspicions grew, but one incident occurred that dealt a serious blow to his previous objectivity. It was viewing the film of Kennedy's assassination by amateur photographer Abraham Zapruder. A copy of the film was made from the original by the FBI and stored at the National Archives. Only researchers with advanced reservations were allowed to see it. The horrific scenes are almost unmentionable. The president's head exploded. Jackie Kennedy, reacting, climbed back over the car's trunk to retrieve some of the skull and matter that projected backwards. The traumatized widow would later hand these remnants over to a doctor at Parkland Hospital. Backwards. The president's body was slammed backwards. His head jerked backwards. Motorcycle officer Bobby Hargis testified to the Warren Commission that he was splattered with blood and brain. Hargis was riding behind and to the left of the president's limo. The president's limousine was driving away from the Texas School Book Depository, which would place Oswald firing from behind the president's car and 6 stories up. Common sense and ballistics would indicate that all of these backward reactions were caused by projectiles coming from the front of the president and hurtling him, and the detritus that came from him rearward, projectiles coming from the general direction of the much maligned grassy knoll and triple overpass. But this was the JFK assassination, and the usual laws of physics seemed not to apply, at least not officially. The only information that had been disseminated to the American public up to this point was at odds with what was clearly obvious on the Zapruder film. And once again, this early equivocation pointed in the direction of Lee Harvey Oswald. And this is it.
The films we saw were taken by an amateur photographer who had a particularly good vantage point. A second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Barry slammed his fist on the table at the archives that day. He knew that the discrepancies of the stricken president's reactions were mentioned nowhere in the colossal Warren Report or its 26 volumes. Barry also knew that reenactments had been conducted to determine the timing of Oswald's movements in this supposedly simple case. On November 25th, 3 short days after the crime, the Secret Service put depository employee Mrs. Robert Reed through her drill 3 times. Mrs. Reed had testified she saw a calm Oswald walking through the second-floor offices with a Coke in his hand, at a time that would have corresponded with him leaving the lunchroom after his encounter with Officer Baker. On November 29th, the FBI put a stopwatch to Roy Truly and Marion Baker, having them huff and puff up and down the stairwell. An FBI agent played Oswald's role. All in all, the feds drilled 10 scenarios to figure out Lee Oswald's most likely route, the one that put him in the lunchroom at the appointed time. Given a set of variables, including evidence that ruled out the elevators, the FBI concluded the only possible route required Lee to hustle down that northwest stairwell to the second-floor landing. All those tests, and yet the 4th floor ladies were snubbed, nor were their roles in the trials depicted by stand-ins. That omission was made even more odd by information in an internal report co-written by David Bellin and Joseph Ball, in which Team Assassin wrote regarding Miss Adams, "No one else was observed at the stairs at this time," and ended the segment with, "We should pin down this time sequence of her running down the stairs."
We should pin down this time sequence of her running down the stairs. But staff counsel seemed to be leaning on the old legal adage, don't ask a question you don't want the answer to. Or perhaps more apropos, don't ask a question if you don't want the answer to be on permanent public record. And so the 4th floor crew was excluded from the reenactments.
By August of '64, commission staff was still wrestling with the problem of the invisible stairwalker. Howard Willans offered a blunt remedy. Willans, whose book dedication reads, "To my colleagues on the staff of the Warren Commission who knew that truth was their only client," wrote to J. Lee Rankin, "This testimony would be set forth and appraised on the issue as to how and when Oswald descended from the 6th floor. In such a discussion, the Commission could rely on some witnesses and reject the testimony of others, such as Victoria Adams." But apparently it took a village to discredit her. Assistant Counsel Wesley J. Liebler played devil's advocate in confronting some commission problems, writing in part, "If the idea is to show that Adams was not on the stairway when Oswald was, I am not convinced by the analysis or speculation in these 2 paragraphs. How about a first sentence like, Victoria Adams testified that she came down the stairway within about 1 minute after the shots, from the 4th floor to the 1st floor, where she encountered 2 depository employees, Bill Shelley and Billy Lovelady. If Miss Adams was on the stairway at that time, the question is raised as to why she did not see Oswald."
Indeed, that is the unrivaled question.
In her life after Dallas, Texas, Victoria Adams graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in business administration. She married and with her husband traveled the United States for 6 years, unknowingly lending Barry Ernest's pre-internet search for her even greater difficulties. She also started a family. Establishing a career in the real estate field, she was listed in the Who's Who of American Women and Who's Who in the World. She also authored a cookbook. Victoria Adams had long ago put away the events of November 22, 1963. Now married, her husband had cautioned her more than once about the inordinate amount of people linked to JFK's assassination that died prematurely. The one time she attempted to come forward didn't end the way she had hoped. In 1966, researcher Mark Lane had asked her to come on a television show hosted by comedian Mort Saul. Lane and Saul were both vocal critics of the Warren Commission.
It's as Garrison has pointed out, when it comes to admitting that there's been a military coup in the United States, there are no liberals. There are no open-minded people.
Vicki accepted, but when she tried to explain the particulars of the stairway timing, both men interrupted her. Though well-intentioned, they only wanted to hear about a man she had seen outside the building. We'll discuss this man a little later. It was an unnerving and frustrating experience, and the last time she would attempt to put her story out.
So when she got an email from a friend of Barry's in February 2002 asking if she was the same Victoria Adams that graduated from Presentation High School in 1959 and used to work in Dallas, Texas, she was apprehensive yet intrigued. She was far removed by distance and time from Dallas, 1963. She eventually put Barry Ernest through a lengthy vetting process before determining that this gentleman might be the one to set the record straight once and for all, the story she had given up on long ago.
She eventually confided. The period following John Kennedy's assassination was a dark one for her. On the day of the murder, upon arriving home, she had written a 6-page letter detailing her experiences and observations. She sent it to her former supervisor, John O'Connor, editor of the San Francisco Catholic newspaper, The Monitor. He never received it. Vicki was dogged by the FBI, Secret Service, and the Dallas police. When approached directly, it was always the same thing. Tell us about your trip down the stairs. Her credibility was impugned by men like David Bellin.
It just confounds common sense and logic.
Regarding one of the most historical events of her lifetime, and this denunciation was permanently enshrined in one of the most important documents in American history. Bellin had called her a liar, saying he didn't believe one word she said. She responded more than once, and to more than one inquisitor, that Sandra Styles could corroborate everything. I asked him why they didn't call Sandra Styles. He said they didn't need her. They had me. That was enough. Looking backwards, I think they didn't want to corroborate any evidence.
Bellin was patronizing, and here we're given a little window into Vicki's off-the-record pre-interview.
During the informal party, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and looked at me straight. Now, Miss Adams, don't you think you could be wrong? Memory's a funny thing and tricks some people. I looked at him straight in the eye and said, I could be wrong, but I'm not wrong. I know what I saw, what I did, and what I heard. When she first realized the impact that her testimony had in relation to the guilt of Lee Harvey Oswald, she became frightened. There were serious implications there. She lost faith and trust in her government. And there was something else weird. That bit about Shelley and Lovelady.
Vicki Adams never saw Bill Shelley or Billy Lovelady.
When she had first read it in the Warren Report, she had thought it odd enough. But later, when she happened upon the 26 volumes and what was supposed to be her verbatim testimony, how could it be there in her own words? Vicki wondered if the Lovelady Shelley passage was inserted afterwards. The only person she remembered on the first floor was a black man she recognized as a warehouse worker. She told this man that she thought the president had been shot. He didn't respond. But Shelley and Lovelady, they weren't there, she told Barry.
Vicki said her testimony regarding the supposed encounter with Lovelady and Shelley simply didn't sound like her.
Another thing, and this might seem really minor, but I think it is important. Whenever I answer a question yes or no by habit, I always said sir. At that time of my life, that was a habit with me. Just like simple Southern courtesy, there's something wrong with that whole section.
Barry had searched earlier for Sandra Styles, who had accompanied Vicki down the stairs, in hopes she could point him to Vicki Adams. But these newfound revelations from Vicki and the absence of any mention of Sandra suggested a conduct from the commission that was even more sinister.
Barry was now armed with the internet, plus a good tip from Vicki that Sandra Styles had attended Baylor University. He found the pertinent information of the now married Sandra Styles butler, who still lived in Texas.
Sandra was receptive. Barry asked her many questions over a period of several days, without informing her of the details of his conversations with Adams. He didn't want outside influences to tarnish her recollection.
Sandra remembered that they had left the window fairly quickly and before the president's car went under the triple underpass. Sandra described the stairs as old, wooden, and creaky. She said she would have heard someone on the steps from above or below.
And of the first floor, she told Barry, quote, several people were milling around the first floor. One was a black man, end quote. This also corresponded with what Vicki Adams said.
And as to William Shelley and Billy Lovelady, Sandra said that Shelley and Lovelady
were not there.
Her certainty on this point was even stronger than Vicki's. Sandra explained that she had known both men well and would have recognized them. Barry didn't let this slide. Over the next few days, he emailed her other questions and variations on the encounter that wasn't, the encounter the commission pointedly used to discredit Vicki Adams. Sandra repeated her previous assertion. All I can say is that Shelley and Lovelady were definitely not on the first floor when we got there.
Barry Ernest knew his quest to get at the truth of that day would not progress without directly interviewing some of the key witnesses, especially Victoria Adams. In a case of such magnitude, controversy, and contradictions, the key to unlocking some of these riddles had to come from the people themselves, and not from the stilted and indistinct writings of the Warren Commission.
Barry started actively searching for her in March of '68. He went to Ground Zero, the Texas School Book Depository. A receptionist at Vicki's former employer told him that she no longer worked there and had left no forwarding address. Barry checked 3 different addresses that Vicki had previously given authorities. No luck and no leads. He went to the library and checked records, tax, residency, employment, any possible link, and he called every Adams in the phone book. A complete strikeout. The new millennium found him with a computer to draft the book he never intended to write. It was researcher Harold Weisberg who convinced him that the information he uncovered was too important not to share. With the advent of the internet and the help of a friend, Barry was finally able to connect with Victoria Adams over 35 years after his journey began.
This video is not intended to replace Barry Ernest's book, The Girl on the Stairs. In this opening segment I call The Killing Floor, I'm dealing largely with testimony regarding the whereabouts of Lee Harvey Oswald just before, during, and after 12:30 p.m. Barry's book, on the other hand, is a well-written and highly praised personal account of one man's quest for answers and of the story of Victoria Adams. She was quite an amazing person, and her story is one of a young woman who faced intense scrutiny and pressure from the highest levels of government. In addition, the book details some of Barry's interviews with some of the well-known characters in this drama, the fruit of hours of heavy lifting he did in the National Archives, and his early work with some of the highly regarded researchers in this case. The Girl on the Stairs is a treasure trove of some really good information, so if you want the complete story of Vicki and Barry, it's in this book. William Shelley, Billy Lovelady, and Victoria Adams were each deposed on the afternoon of April 7th, 1964, at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Dallas, Texas. Joseph Ball handled the gentleman, while David Bellin greeted Vicki without standing up. She remembered that detail all those years later. Here are the relevant portions of her testimony. I'll be interjecting periodically to discuss points of interest.
Bellin, were you standing with anyone? Adams, yes, sir. Bellin, with whom? Adams, I was standing with Sandra Styles, Elsie Dorman, and Dorothy Garner.
After establishing Vicki was on the 4th floor, Bellin asked,
Bellin, will you state what you saw, what you did, what you heard? Vicki spoke of watching the President and Mrs. Kennedy turn toward their building, of looking at Jackie's clothing, and of seeing roses in the car. Then she heard shots. Adams, it seemed as if it came from the right below, rather than from the left above. These directions reflect Vicki's vantage point from inside the book depository looking out. She was indicating the shots came from down and west, the general direction of the grassy knoll and railroad tracks, rather than the sniper's nest only 2 floors above and slightly east. But then she hedged her opinion by adding, possibly because of the report. Adams, and after the 3rd shot, following that, the 3rd shot, I went to the back of the building, down the back stairs, and encountered Bill Shelley and Bill Lovelady on the 1st floor on the way out to the Houston Street dock.
As stated, Vicki Adams told Barry that this did not happen, and she only remembers encountering a male black employee. Her recollection on both these points is supported by Sandra Styles.
Bellin, when you say on the way out to the Houston Street dock, you mean now you were on the way out? Adams, while I was on the way out. Bellin, was anyone going along with you? Adams, yes, sir, Sandra Styles.
He further ascertained from Vicki that she was running while wearing 3-inch heels, and that the elevator adjacent to the stairwell was not moving, as his questions followed her descent from the 4th floor down to the 1st floor.
Bellin, when you got to the bottom of the 1st floor, did you see anyone there as you entered the 1st floor from the stairway? Adams, yes, sir. Bellin, who did you see? Adams, Mr. Bill Shelley and Billy Lovelady.
I believe we are in our rights to consider that the words Mr. Bill Shelley and Billy Lovelady were inserted for "I saw a black employee" or some semblance thereof.
Bellin, now what did you do after you encountered Mr. Shelley and Mr. Lovelady? Adams, I said I believe the president was shot. Bellin, do you remember what they said? Adams, nothing.
Vicki Adams recalled saying that the president had been shot, but it was to the black employee, not Shelley and Lovelady, and it was he who didn't respond.
Vicki then recounted her quick adventures outside, which consisted of her attempting to go west toward the railroad tracks, but only making it about 2 yards past them before a policeman told her to go back. She spoke briefly to a depository employee, Avery Davis, before going back inside her work building. 2 attempts at taking elevators upstairs found them, in Vicki's words, not operating. She eventually made her way back to the Scott Forsman Company. David Bellin had come full circle, back to the issue that apparently had given him so many sleepless nights. Bellin, now trying to reconstruct your actions insofar as the time sequence, which we haven't done, what is your best estimate of the time between the time the shots were fired and the time you got back to the building? How much time elapsed? If you have an estimate, maybe you don't have one. Adams, I would estimate not more than 5 minutes elapsed. Bellin, is there any particular reason why you make this estimation?
Vicki again recounted her brief outside movements, adding the whole time she was running or moving quickly, only pausing for a short conversation.
Bellin, how long do you think it was between the time the shots were fired and the time you left the window to start toward the stairway? Adams, between 15 and 30 seconds, estimated approximately.
We know that this 15 to 30 seconds was changed in the Warren report to within about a minute.
Bellin, how long do you think it was, or do you think it took you to get from the window to the top of the 4th floor stairs? Adams, I don't think I can answer that question accurately because the time approximation, without a stopwatch, would be difficult.
Vicki told Barry that this last answer, the time approximation without a stopwatch would be difficult, was a direct dig at David Bellin because he had told her in the pre-interview that he wouldn't include her in the time test after she requested to do so.
Bellin, how long do you think it took you to get from the window to the bottom of the stairs on the 1st floor? Adams, I would say no longer than a minute at the most. Bellin, so you think that from the time you left the window on the 4th floor until the time you got to the stairs at the bottom of the 1st floor was approximately 1 minute? Adams, yes, approximately.
To Bellin's next queries, Vicki Adams said she never saw Roy Truly or any motorcycle policeman during her descent and exit out the building. She also said she didn't hear anyone else on the stairs, but this of course wouldn't include Sandra Styles. An uninformed observer to this interview would have forgotten about Sandra Styles because although Vicki referenced her twice, Bellin never mentioned her name. Up to this point, the back and forth seemed to flow somewhat smoothly, notwithstanding the probable fiction. Bellin retreaded some of the same ground and then got back to the 2 Bills, Lovelady and Shelley. This next exchange does not flow, it is inarticulate, and it shows an abruptness from Vicki not apparent elsewhere.
Bellin, when you got to the 1st floor, did you immediately proceed to this point where you say you encountered Mr. Shelley and Mr. Lovelady? Well, you showed me on a diagram of the 1st floor that there was a place which was south and somewhat east of the front part of the east elevator that you encountered Truly and Lovelady? Adams, I saw them there. Bellin, I mean, you saw them? Adams, yes.
Bellin's last reference was to Truly and Lovelady. Truly was the superintendent who accompanied Officer Baker. The reference should have been to Shelley and Lovelady, and Vicki didn't correct him as would be expected. Vicki's last 2 responses here fell flat like a wet rag. Remember, she said she always said yes sir and no sir. It was simple Southern courtesy.
Let's take a quick overview of her testimony on this point. In total, where the appropriate answer asked for an affirmative or negative response, Vicki tallied up 19 no sirs, 15 yes sirs, 6 yeses, and 1 no. Adams, I saw them there. Bellin, I mean, you saw them? Adams, yes. It's no wonder she stared at that passage, decades later, with renewed skepticism.
The testimony ended shortly after that exchange. Bellin confirmed that Vicki never saw Lee Harvey Oswald on her sojourn down the stairs. Then she offered one last gem before they concluded. Bellin asked if Vicki had any other information that could be relevant.
Vicki said that while outside the building, she and depository employee Avery Davis saw a man who stood out for several reasons. He was dressed in a suit and asking questions as if he were a police officer. Within a few days, she saw Oswald's killer, Jack Ruby, on television. Vicki said that the man she had seen outside the depository looked very similar to Jack Ruby. This was the same man that Mark Lane and Mort Saul had wanted to hear about, and little else, on that TV show. According to the Warren Commission, Jack Ruby was in the offices of the Dallas Morning News at the time of the assassination. The newspaper offices were 2 short blocks from Dealey Plaza. Ruby was very controversial, to say the least. The official story was that he gunned down Oswald on the spur of the moment, out of a patriotic love for the Kennedys, and to prevent the aggrieved Jackie from having to testify at trial. There were sightings of Jack Ruby at Parkland Hospital that afternoon, and now Vicki Adams seemed to be placing him outside the depository moments after the president's shooting, adding fuel to the scenario that he was calculatingly following Oswald, waiting for the first opportunity to silence him. David Bellin asked Vicki exactly one question about her Jack Ruby bombshell. Was this before you got back in the front door of the building that you saw this?
Bellin's response sounded as if it were intended to feign interest without procuring any details of substantiation. He actually asked her if she saw Ruby outside before she went back inside. That would have been the optimum time. His very next response was,
Is there anything else?
You mean you don't want to know more about the man who looked like Oswald's assassin, Jack Ruby? By the way, Avery Davis, the employee Vicki testified also observed the man that looked like Jack Ruby, was never questioned by the Warren Commission. One more entry in the Witnesses Ignored column.
This incomprehensible lack of interest in the man charged with killing the man charged with the president's murder by the men charged with the investigation was further demonstrated by the Commission's treatment of Scripps Howard newspaper reporter Seth Cantnor. Cantnor had known Ruby for years and testified to the Warren Commission that the effusively mannered strip club owner had supplied him with material for at least half a dozen stories. It was Cantnor who had seen and spoken with Ruby at Parkland Hospital after the assassination. Ruby's ubiquity that day did not correspond with the Commission's portrayal of him as the crazed, solo, spur-of-the-moment assassin of Lee Oswald. If Ruby was present at Parkland, that would have invited further unwelcome speculation of conspiracy behind the president's murder, so they decided Cantnor was wrong and that he did not see or speak with Ruby at Parkland Hospital. Here is Cantnor in his own words.
And I told him I thought that was a good idea and to please excuse me, I had to go on. I guess that encounter with Ruby took maybe 25, 30 seconds. It was very clear to me who I had talked to and who I had called by name and who had called me by name and who I had shaken hands with and everything. But when the Warren Commission report came out, they said that probably under the stress of everything that was going on, that I most likely was confused and that I talked to Ruby at the police station several hours later. I was dismayed when I picked up my copy of the Warren Commission report and discovered what they had decided about my testimony. And among other things, I immediately began to wonder, who else they had talked to, who they chose not to believe, and why.
Who else indeed? There was one bit of business left to wrap up with Victoria Adams' testimony, one more item of controversy. Bellin. Miss Adams, you have the opportunity, if you would like, to read this deposition and sign it before it goes to Washington, or you can waive the signing of it and just let the court reporter send it directly to us. Do you have any preference? Adams. I think I will let you use your own discretion. Bellin. It doesn't make any difference to us. If it doesn't make any difference, we can waive it and you won't have to make another trip down here. Adams. That is all right. Bellin. We want to thank you for your cooperation. We know that it has taken time on your part. Would you also thank your employer? Adams. Yes, sir.
Remember, Vicki had told Barry that back in 1966, she had first read her testimony and a library copy of the commission volumes. In addition to other major discrepancies, she noticed another glaring untruth. She had, in fact, taken the offer to examine her deposition, which was later hand-delivered to her office.
A wordsmith and a nitpicker with the English language, she had found several typographical mistakes and had made the necessary changes. She now discovered each one of the errors had gone uncorrected. The mistakes left standing, she now realized, made her look stupid.
Barry asked her if she remembered seeing the Shelley Lovelady incident in the deposition she proofread. She replied that while she didn't remember, if she had seen that passage, she would have removed it since she didn't see the two men.
Because of the strange circumstances and discounting of my statements, my multiple questioning by various government agencies, and the Warren Commission's conclusions, I lost my starry-eyed beliefs in the integrity of our government, and I was scared too. I was a young lady alone with no family or friend support at the time.
I promised you a couple of smoking guns. The first one was of conspicuous alteration in the testimony of record and how it related to the posthumous case against Lee Harvey Oswald. The second smoking gun has multiple barrels, and its origins were contained in a memo long ago hidden away.
The year was 1999. Barry Ernest was in the trenches of the National Archives again, searching. Sometimes it's simply a matter of luck when you're at the archives. Occasionally, out of all those hundreds of thousands of documents and millions upon millions of words, out of all that verbal rubble, all it takes is a single innocuous sentence. Sometimes that sentence is so innocent and simple in content that, to the uninformed eye, it means absolutely nothing. Barry's eye had been caught by the handwritten notation at the top of a photocopy, Adams, Vicki, dated June 2, 1964. The letter was addressed to Commission Chief Counsel J. Lee Rankin. It was written by U.S. Assistant Attorney Martha Jo Stroud on behalf of Dallas U.S. Attorney Barefoot Sanders, and later referred to as the Stroud document. This file was not contained in the Warren Report, the 26 volumes, or even in the Vicki Adams or J. Lee Rankin files, as it should have been. It was in a place not favorable with easy discovery. The Stroud document was a cover letter consisting of 2 short paragraphs. The first paragraph indicated the corrections made by Victoria Adams to her April 7th deposition. This was an action that, according to the Commission, never happened, because the record shows Vicki waived her right to make those amendments. Barry ended up requesting the entire Victoria Adams file from the National Archives, motivated by Vicki's revelations. He was astonished to find a new replacement version of her testimony, slightly different in appearance than the one he'd examined in 1968. Both the old and the new contained the Lovelady Shelley references, but unlike the previous, this one actually had Vicki's corrections and her signature. Therefore, before the deposition reached the government printing office, persons unknown made the Bellin corrections, but left Vicki Adams' statement untouched in the official volumes. Also, Barry noted the newer version was declassified by authority of the JFK Records Act on February 9, 2011. The JFK Records Act was passed by Congress and made effective in October of 1992, mandating the declassification of all U.S. government records related to President Kennedy's assassination. The impetus behind this action was, in part, due to public furor over director Oliver Stone's movie JFK, especially the ending, which explained that the Justice Department failed to follow up on the 1970s congressional investigation which found a probable conspiracy behind JFK's murder, and that the files of the House Select Committee on Assassinations were locked away until the year 2029. Here is a brief chronology that demonstrates another intrigue. April 7, 1964. David Bellin deposes Victoria Adams in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Dallas, Texas. The official record shows Miss Adams was given the opportunity to review and correct her testimony, and she declined. November 21st, 1967, Vicki's testimony was declassified for the first time. October 26, 1992, the JFK Records Act is signed into law by President George H.W. Bush, mandating a full public disclosure of records related to the assassination by October 26, 2017, a date which has come and gone without full compliance. As previously noted, this act came behind director Oliver Stone's movie JFK, especially the ending that explained that information about Kennedy's assassination was still being withheld from the American public. December 10, 2010, author Barry Ernest self-publishes The Girl on the Stairs. Pelican Publishing will pick it up in 2012 for major distribution. February 9, 2011, Vicki's testimony is declassified again, 44 years after the first time, and 2 months after the Stroud document was first publicly revealed in The Girl on the Stairs.
Was Barry's book, chronicling new inconsistencies in the Warren Report, behind the release of a revised version of Vicki's statement 20 years after the JFK Records Act began, and 2 months after his book's debut? The testimony of Victoria Adams holds the possible distinction of the only document that was redeclassified. Is that even a word? Her original uncorrected deposition was declassified in 1967, and the newer version, the one showing the corrections, was declassified in 2011. Here's another question to consider. Does Vicki's unblemished story, the one we now know, preclude Oswald from descending those stairs? In other words, in spite of what appears to be egregious and unlawful conduct on behalf of commission staff, could Lee still have slunk undetected from that 6th floor perch to the 2nd floor lunchroom? Hold that thought for a moment.
The Martha Stroud document, 2 paragraphs and 12 lines. We already discussed the first paragraph. Let's take a look at the second one. Mr. Bellin was questioning Miss Adams about whether or not she saw anyone as she was running down the stairs. Miss Garner, Miss Adams' supervisor, stated this morning that after Miss Adams went downstairs, she, Miss Garner, saw Mr. Truly and the policeman come up.
This was the innocent-sounding sentence Barry had referred to, but it jumped at him like a jack-in-the-box. It was unanimous. Vicki, Sandra Styles, and Dorothy Garner were fully in sync.
The third sentence of the Stroud document is key and bears repeating. Miss Garner, Miss Adams' supervisor, stated this morning that after Miss Adams went downstairs, she, Miss Garner, saw Mr. Truly and the policeman come up. It was complete. Dorothy Garner provided clear corroboration that Victoria Adams and Sandra Styles departed in such a rapid manner that they preceded Marion Baker and Roy Truly's ascension up the stairs, in contrast with what the Warren Commission concluded. They had tried very hard to categorize Vicki Adams as a wayward witness, a young girl whose recall was phased by events and who stubbornly refused to conform to the obvious, but the truth lay deep, and Barry Ernest had dug it up. Another revelation was to come, with an even bolder implication. It dealt once again with the 4th floor boss, Dorothy Garner, a woman Vicki Adams described as efficient, no-nonsense, detail-oriented, and feared by staff, and we owe it once again to the resolve of Barry Ernest to bring it to light. There is only one official interview with Dorothy Garner. Between March 23rd and April 1st, 1964, the FBI took affidavits from the 73 book depository employees who had worked on November 22nd. They read like templates: name, race, sex, address, where they were at the time of the shots. Did they see any strangers in the building that day? Garner's account was somewhat succinct. She described being at the window with the other 3 girls and said she stayed on the 4th floor for the remainder of the day until they were dismissed. The Stroud memo contained information that shed light on Lee Harvey Oswald's whereabouts, or where-nots, at 12:30 p.m., information not contained in Dorothy Garner's FBI affidavit. This potentially exculpatory document was misfiled somewhere in the labyrinth of the National Archives, to be unearthed one day by Barry Ernest. Barry was newly incentivized to find Miss Garner, if she was still around. An anonymous tip paid off. She was now in her 80s.
Barry found her lucid and willing to talk. During their phone conversation, Dorothy was surprised at Barry's undertaking, conveying a complete unawareness that the girls on the 4th floor played any significant role in the investigation. She did have a good recall of that day's events.
She recounted the chaos of the FBI and the Secret Service, how the Dallas police took over the phones and wouldn't let any personal calls go out. She said Vicki and Sandra had left the window very quickly within a matter of moments. Garner followed on the heels of the girls. However, her goal was to get to the storage area, probably to get something, as her memory on that small detail wasn't fresh. There was this warehouse or storage area behind our office, out by the freight elevators and rear stairway, and I went there.
Dorothy Garner was also clear on another point, that she had been interviewed by someone from the Warren Commission, in addition to her brief FBI statement in March. Although unclear on detail, she distinctly remembers the man identifying himself as being from the Warren Commission. This interview is nowhere in the volumes. I've made many references to the rear stairwell of the Texas School Book Depository. Their exact features are key to this story.
The northwest stairs, the only route Oswald could have come down according to all authorities, are not fully contained within the stairwell like you would see in a typical office building today. At each level, one must exit through a door and walk out onto each floor, skirt the corner of the room, and re-enter another door to continue up or down the stairs. This puts the pedestrian in full view of any employee in the general area, notwithstanding interior office walls, shelves, or other obstructions. Dorothy Garner was in a spot which allowed her to easily see or hear anyone navigating the stairs. She arrived there moments after the shooting, on the heels of Vicki Adams and Sandra Styles. That is why the Stroud memo reflects her seeing Truly and Baker run up. They had to traverse the storage area of the 4th floor to continue their trek upwards. Although Mrs. Garner had followed right behind, she didn't observe the girls enter the stairwell. When Barry asked her how she knew they had descended, she replied that she could hear them, as the stairs were very noisy. Garner remained in the storage area adjacent to the stairwell for some time. Although this photo depicts the 2nd floor landing, it is similar to the commanding view Garner had of anyone on the 4th floor stairwell. She was there when the girls descended. She was there, according to the Stroud document, when Truly and Baker ran up, which would have been after Baker detained Oswald in the lunchroom. It was what Dorothy Garner didn't see, seated in her sentinel position mere seconds after the fatal gunshots. She didn't see Lee Harvey Oswald. Dorothy Garner, 2 floors below from where Oswald purportedly shot the president, arrived at her position in seconds on the heels of the girls and in place to see Baker and Truly, never saw or heard Lee Harvey Oswald descend from the 6th floor. She told Barry Ernest that given Oswald's soon-to-be notoriety, she felt sure she would have remembered seeing him on the stairs. She laughed at the question. No, I don't remember that. I don't remember seeing him at all that day, except on TV. I cannot say much about what I believe happened, but I do suspect Oswald was never on the 6th floor at the time of the assassination. Victoria Adams from The Girl on the Stairs. A final look at the diagram. Dorothy Garner, a critical witness whose observations were ignored, and indeed covered up by the Warren Commission staff, gets called up from the bench.
I believe we are fully justified in leaving Shelley and Lovelady off the diagram at this point. The preponderance of evidence indicates they were somewhere other than meeting the girls on the 1st floor, despite concerted efforts to make it appear otherwise.
We'll start with the Commission's version of Oswald's location and actions. Oswald fires his 3rd and final shot, wipes the rifle down, and makes his way across the 6th floor to the area where he carefully hides his weapon. Styles and Adams, 2 floors below, make toward the stairs quickly and descend. Garner trails the girl so closely she hears their footfall. Garner then posts near the stairwell. Oswald, well, what do we make of this? If he came from the 6th floor within that very narrow time frame, how was he not seen or heard by Dorothy Garner?
I'm just a patsy.
The president.
Remember, Oswald maintained he was eating lunch on the first floor and came up to the second floor for a Coke. This scenario, from the man who insisted he was a patsy and who himself would be murdered and silenced within 48 hours, evidentially corresponds to the now-known statements of Vicki Adams, Sandra Styles, and Dorothy Garner, as well as to the descriptions by Marion Baker and Roy Truly of a man whose demeanor was in contrast with that of one who had just killed a president and then ran down a flight of stairs.
There is another possible scenario in this puzzle which puts the girls running down the stairs past the trio in the lunchroom while that confrontation took place. We won't run it here. It poses many of its own problems, but it doesn't negate the girls' departure time from the window. It is something to keep in mind for future reference. One last barrel to empty. I saved it for the very end. Please stay tuned.
Gerald Posner and the late Vincent Bugliosi are two of the most well-known Warren Commission advocates. Most mainstream media describes these two as having written the last word on the Kennedy assassination.
And I'm assuming, Gerald, you did tons and tons and tons of research and investigating.
There was a time it was actually difficult to walk through my apartment because there were papers piled up everywhere, much to my wife's great dismay.
Vincent Bugliosi uses his prosecutor's eye to debunk every conspiracy theory connected to the assassination in a book that's been 20 years in the making.
In Posner's case closed, he gave Vicki Adams two mentions. The first was in regard to the direction of the shot she heard. The second mention was about the stairway controversy. Here, Posner towed the company line, saying Lee Oswald descended immediately. As for Styles and Adams, although they thought they came down quickly, they actually did not arrive on the first floor until at least 4 to 5 minutes after the third shot. The critical testimony is from Vicki Adams, who said that when she got to the first floor, she saw Billy Lovelady and William Shelley.
Posner actually acknowledged Sandra Styles here, although it was to say she was also wrong. Although I can't really blame him for acting on what he perceived to be valid testimony, it aptly demonstrates how the Commission's work had its desired effect.
And what treatment did Manson family prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi give to Vicki Adams in his much heralded Reclaiming History? She was mentioned once in that 1,600-page body. Having posited from page 1 that Oswald was the lone shooter, Bugliosi sarcastically mulled over the counter-argument. At least, I think he was being sarcastic. So if it wasn't Oswald who shot Kennedy from the 6th-floor window, and no stranger was in the building at the time, it must have been some other book depository employee, right? But who? Charles Givens? James Jarman? Vicki Adams? Why not? Women can pull triggers too, you know.
21 years in the making and working with a small team, that is what Vincent Bugliosi had to offer on the subject of Vicki Adams. It is doubtful he or Gerald Posner ever attempted to locate and interview Vicki Adams, Sandra Styles, or Dorothy Garner, among others. It was Vincent Bugliosi who said, if you remember, that conspiracy theorists like to split the split hairs. That's actually what you have to do in this case to get to the bottom of things. So on behalf of all the researchers who split the split hairs over the years, thank you. The story of Vicki Adams and Barry Ernest amply demonstrates the pattern that permeates the JFK assassination. Warren Commission conclusions that don't match original testimony, witnesses harassed, witnesses ignored, evidence destroyed, and in this case, testimony presumably altered. There are many more, but those are the salient ones that apply to this episode. Barry Ernest, with his investigative skills and exacting standards of proof, came to this elaborate puzzle and filled in a few big pieces. putting the picture into clearer focus and providing better illumination behind the actions of those in power at the time.
There's a few loose ends to tie up before we finish. You may call this conjecture or logical inference. When you're working with deficiencies in evidence and official improprieties, it becomes necessary to try and reconcile the unreconcilable, especially for those of you asking, how is this possible? This is not intended to be conclusive, merely a working framework to bridge the points of knowledge. As Conan Doyle's fictional detective Sherlock Holmes said, your hypothesis is likely to be as correct as mine.
If I take the position that David Bellin, acting under direction or on his own initiative, invented the first floor meeting to clear the stairwell for a fictitious or even a more palatable escape by Oswald from the 6th floor, then I have to explain the interview by Detective Lavelle 7 weeks before the Bellin deposition, in which Vicki supposedly mentioned just such an encounter. Shy of conjecture, I simply can't explain Lavelle or his report, but the fact that Barry Ernest was able to get to the source allows us to fill in some of those empty and conflicting areas before we delve into speculation. Here's a few things Barry learned from Victoria Adams that is reflected nowhere in the report or the volumes.
Vicki was startled when Detective Lavelle showed up at her front door. It was late, after 8 p.m. Even more surprising, she had moved to that apartment just the day before. It was rented in a friend's name. Vicki hadn't informed anyone of this change, not her boss, co-workers, or the post office. Reflecting, she felt she had to have been followed once again. Although a Dallas policeman, Lavelle wasn't known as a man who inspired feelings of security.
He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
The detective's stated reason for being there sounded fantastical and is known today to be absolutely false. Vicki asked him why he needed another talk when she had already given her testimony to the Dallas police. He replied that all of the records had been burned in a fire and they had to interview everyone again. But there was no such fire, and there certainly wasn't a re-interviewing of all of the witnesses.
I don't think Detective Lavelle was known for his improvisational skills.
Vicki had never seen Lavelle's report of that interview. Barry provided it for her to read, and she was mystified once again. She felt the Lovelady Shelley passage was inserted there, the same as in her Bellin deposition. Barry Ernest telephoned Lavelle in 1999. The retired detective said he vaguely recalled the young woman who came down the stairs after the shots, but the incident hadn't been germane as to what they were looking for. A somewhat exasperated Barry asked what were they looking for. Lavelle said that they were preparing for trial, and if the witness couldn't provide anything they could use against Oswald, then it wasn't important. The totality of the evidence appears incontrovertible that Victoria Adams and Sandra Styles did not encounter Lovelady or Shelley on their way out of the building. As Vicki herself mused when reading Lavelle's report, I can't imagine that they would have returned to the building and been standing in the back of the building when all the action was outside. Detective Lavelle's report indicating otherwise is highly suspect considering the following: the false circumstances, the made-up fire under which it was procured, the redundancy coming on the heels of Vicki's FBI interview and just prior to her Bellin deposition, and everything we've learned about the real statements and recall of Vicki, Sandra, and the two Bills. It would have been the easiest of tasks, under those relaxed protocols that were antithetical to a search for the truth, to have made late additions to the report, or to completely rewrite it as needed. There are dozens of aspects of the Kennedy assassination that have had critics and researchers screaming cover-up and conspiracy over the past several decades. Before I offer my final word on whether or not I think Lee Oswald was ever on the 6th floor, I thought it was important to explore one of those other controversies. Let's talk about that magic bullet. 48 hours after the president's murder and almost immediately after Oswald's execution, a secret meeting was held. Before the body of Kennedy's accused assassin was barely cold, two major dictates emerged from this meeting which replaced any semblance of impartiality with an agenda-driven investigation. The first was from FBI Director Hoover, who proclaimed, "The thing I am most concerned about, and so is Katzenbach, is having something issued so we can convince the public that Oswald is the real assassin." The following day, Katzenbach wrote a memo to a top assistant of newly minted President Johnson. It read in part, The public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have Confederates who are still at large, and that the evidence was such that he would have been convicted at trial. And so the investigator's task was made harder or easier, depending on one's perspective. There was to be one shooter, and one shooter only. Analysis of the vantage point from the sniper's nest, evidence from the Zapruder film suggesting 3 shots were fired in under 6 seconds, 3 spent cartridges found next to the sniper's window, and a complete disregard of contrary evidence would cement the conclusion that the commission had found their culprit. The FBI and Secret Service initially concluded that the first shot struck Kennedy in the back, Governor Connally was hit by the second round, and the third missile delivered the devastating damage to Kennedy's head. But a problem soon cropped up.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about the reason why they came up with the magic bullet theory in the first place.
At the time of the shooting, a man named James Tague was standing by the triple underpass, well beyond the kill zone. A bullet struck a nearby curb, and a piece of concrete from that curb struck Tague in the face, causing a few blood droplets.
In this lane of traffic, Tague was standing here when the motorcade turned onto Elm Street in front of the Texas School Book Depository.
The problem for investigators who were working backwards from a conclusion of 1 gunman and 3 bullets was that Tague's bullet had to be number 4. The trajectory from the 6th floor window to the curb was over the heads of the occupants of the president's limo.
We're thinking, well, all these wounds came from 3 bullets. But then they found a bullet that had hit the curb on the underside. The guy checked into a hospital because he was hit with a ricochet.
The first solution was to ignore the fact that there was another victim of a bullet that day, like legitimate police detectives do. And so they wished him away until someone we are already familiar with, Assistant U.S. Attorney and perhaps unheralded hero, Martha Jo Stroud, pressed the issue by sending commission members newspaper photos and other accounts of the Tague incident. It was Stroud, you will recall, who through suspicion or prescience, or perhaps just an exceptional work ethic, documented an interview with Dorothy Garner that exists nowhere in the official volumes and corroborates the expediency of Vicki Adams' 4th floor departure. A document set adrift in the archives without classification and exhumed by Barry Ernest, and now Stroud struck again. Commission staff could ignore certain people, but not an assistant U.S. attorney, and were ultimately forced to reckon with this evidence. Because it was taboo to introduce a second shooter or a 4th bullet, the performance of the existing 3 shots had to be reimagined. But not by a ballistic expert or homicide specialist. It was Warren Commission attorney Arlen Specter who seized on a theory that 1 bullet could have caused damage, formerly attributed to multiple bullets. 1 fated missile to enter the president's back and exit his throat, enter Governor Connally's armpit and exit his chest, continue through Connally's wrist and exit his palm, and proceed into Connally's thigh, and along the journey smash Connally's 5th rib and his wrist bone.
That would make penetrating skin 7 different times, transiting Kennedy's body, Connally's body, twice through Connally's body. And for the commission's version of this, there is a bullet that performed all of this, which is cynically called the magic bullet.
Anybody that knows anything about hunting or guns or any person that I know that I've talked to, like, is this shot anything? Everyone says no. Everyone says it hasn't hit bone.
Right.
This magic bullet, officially known as CE-399, would be found in nearly pristine condition on one of the hospital gurneys where Governor Connally was being treated.
Not only that, the way they found it on the gurney, on Connally's gurney when he was in the hospital. Oh, look, we found the bullet. Here it is. It's ridiculous.
Here noted author and researcher Jim DiEugenio discusses the story of Dr. Joseph Dolce, the expert hired by the Warren Commission to study how bullets look after they tear into flesh and bone.
Okay, Joseph Dolce was the guy who the Warren Commission actually sent out to the firing range. And he put up, like, dead animal corpses and fired bullets from the Mannlicher Carcano into their limbs, their extensions, like their legs or through their chest, to try and simulate what would happen to a bullet if it went through one of those bones. Because the Warren Commission says that this bullet went through Connally's rib and smashed it, and then smashed his wrist. Well, Dolce went out there with 100 bullets, 100 of these Mannlicher Carcano bullets. And then he took pictures of them afterwards, and he assembled these panels. The Warren Commission did not declassify those pictures until 1972, 8 years after the Warren Commission was published, and you won't see those photos in the Warren Commission. And the reason you won't see them is because no matter what he fired into, either the rib of the animal or the leg of the animal to simulate the wrist, every one of those bullets was much, much more deformed than what the CE-399 is. He said that either every one of them had what they called the mushrooming effect. This is when the edge of the bullet just flattens like the top of a mushroom. Sometimes they actually were just smashed beyond recognition. And so then they asked him, they said, well, in your opinion, do you think, and by the way, before I say this, Dolce was a wound ballistics expert from World War II. He was the Army's #1 wound ballistics expert. When any top brass got hit, they sent Dolce. He was their #1 guy during World War II in the Pacific Theater. So he saw a lot of these things. So they asked him, do you think that this CE-399 could have done it? And he actually used the word, it's physically impossible. It's impossible for a bullet to come out in that condition if it went through Connolly's wrist and his rib. Okay? It's physically impossible.
This episode can be broken down into two basic questions. Does the evidence show that Lee Harvey Oswald was on the 6th floor at the time President Kennedy was shot? And does the evidence show that the Warren Commission was guilty of subverting the facts in this case? The question as to why the Warren Commission would subvert the facts in this case is a much, much broader one and not the subject of our current focus here. As to the latter, I believe the work of Barry Ernest has clearly exposed the methods employed as prima facie evidence of a cover-up. I don't need to enumerate them here again, except for one thought and one addendum.
The thought is, consider how easy it was for David Bellin in this case to control the outcome of testimony by not subpoenaing certain witnesses to testify in front of the actual commission in Washington. This would completely eliminate unwanted questions and their less welcome answers. If the actual record were to be later modified, the only witnesses were Bellin, the person testifying, and the stenographer. The ladies of the 4th floor were burdensome to a case fixated on Oswald. Sandra Styles was ignored, Dorothy Garner was hidden away, and Vicki Adams was brought forth, isolated, pressured, and ultimately shunned. As to the addendum, David Bellin revisited the Vicki Adams problem nearly a decade later in his book, November 22, 1963, You Are the Jury, published in 1973. Bellin's patchwork retelling was no less than shameful, beginning with an introduction that explained how conspiracy theorists have tortured and twisted the original testimony and evidence in order to support cardboard structures. On Vicki Adams, he began by admitting Oswald's descent initially was an issue, writing, "This conclusion was still a tentative one because there was still another problem to be solved if the assassin had used the stairs. This concerned the testimony of Victoria Elizabeth Adams."
Bellin spent 2 pages relating the testimonies of Shelley, Lovelady, and Adams from the supporting volumes, although we now know the integrity of Adams' statement regarding the Lovelady-Shelley encounter is highly suspect due to no fault of her own. Bellin related the detailed description of Lovelady and Shelley's activities while outside.
Then when he was about to reach the point where Lovelady testified, "I saw a girl, but I wouldn't swear to it, it's Vicki," Bellin switched gears by switching books, going from the actual depositions to the whitewashed Warren report, and rehashed the provably false statement he saw a girl on the first floor who he believes was Vicki.
He then put a fork into Vicki by concluding that she was either inaccurate as to her estimate of time or about whom she saw when she got to the bottom of the stairs.
Wrote Bellin, "It is obvious that the human mind is far more accurate on identification of known persons than it is on estimates of time. This is particularly true in this case because Miss Adams is so definite about whom she saw when she got to the first floor, and her observations are confirmed by the testimony of Billy Lovelady, who believed that he saw Miss Adams when they got back into the building."
Speaking of confirmation, of which Billy Lovelady was not, nowhere in Bellin's 500-plus pages will you find the names of those who would confirm Vicki's story, Sandra Styles or Dorothy Garner. I began this episode by putting witnesses and evidence into two categories, positive and negative. As you gain more knowledge of this case, there is another set of parallels by which you can measure it by, probable versus possible.
Could Lee Oswald have fired off 3 shots under 6 seconds with a single-action bolt rifle, as the commission contended? It's possible, lone gunman advocates say. Could his shots have then landed that accurately, keeping in mind the huge miss on Tague, given his underwhelming status as a sharpshooter and the fact that world-class master marksmen hired by the commission couldn't replicate his feat? It's possible, they say.
By the way, you will hear protest. This is not true. One of the commission's men did better Oswald's time and shot placement.
Except that Oswald was supposedly shooting from 60 feet up at a moving target, and at the president, mind you, and the commission's hired guns during reenactments were shooting from 30 feet up at still targets. More on this in the future. Next question. Could one bullet from Lee Oswald's purported rifle have made 7 different entry and exit holes in 2 men, shattering bone along the way, and emerge in nearly pristine condition, earning its forever nickname, the Magic Bullet?
Well, it wasn't that pristine. It was squished. It was an...
Could Lee Harvey Oswald have descended undetected from the 6th floor shortly after 12:30 p.m. and arrived in the 2nd floor lunchroom as calm as the Dalai Lama under those conditions we've so carefully laid out in this video? To all of the above, I'd like to reply that I find them highly improbable. While one act may have defied the odds, when combined together they require a certain suspension of disbelief, especially as found in that term's literal definition. But I get ahead of myself. I needed to make reference to some of the other anomalies in this case to give my opinion to the one at hand. There are different interpretations of the story you just heard. There is additional evidence and testimony to be considered. We haven't heard the last from Baker, Truly, Lovelady, Shelley, or even the Coca-Cola in Oswald's hand. Hopefully we will cover much of this in upcoming episodes. My presentations will never be offered as the last word on any given subject.
Victoria Adams passed away on November 15, 2007 from cancer. At that time, she and Barry Ernest had kept up a steady correspondence for 6 years. She informed him of the sickness in a letter 2 months prior to her death, although she had known the prognosis for some time. Her correspondent said she didn't want the unhappy news to influence the way he wrote about her. A month before her passing, Vicki finished a lengthy introspective on her life and imminent passing. She wrote of bravery and chided herself for accepting pain management, lamenting the loss of control it inflicted. She added, "Bravery to me has been acting heroically in spite of enormous fear. It is setting one's own needs and wants for comfort, ease, and convenience aside, and sometimes reaching through the scared and fragmented parts of ourselves to help someone or something right now."
Barry Ernest is not the type of individual to leave a stone unturned. He was determined to get to the very bottom of the matter, as deep as one individual could go in tracing the material back to its source roots.
He made a detailed request to the National Archives asking for information on all of the official stenographers' tapes. Court reporter Helen Ladrich was the only other person in the room the day Victoria Adams was deposed by David Bellin. If there existed a pure record of testimony, it would be on those stenographic tapes. Barry figured that, while documents could fluctuate in substance in the wrong hands, it would be far more difficult to tamper with the continuous train of coded paper produced by a stenographic machine. These original accordion-style stenotapes and other materials, reflecting the testimony of 552 commissioned witnesses, were stored in 16 boxes at the archives. They were filed in order by date of deposition. Most of these tapes were still unopened at the time of Barry's request. 3 weeks later, he received a reply that the item he requested was unable to be located, along with this list. The list of stenographic records showed no tape entries for April 7, 1964, the testimony date for Victoria Adams, William Shelley, and Billy Lovelady. They should have been between boxes 6 and 7, or included in boxes 6 or 7. The letter tersely read in part, "We do not consider this response a denial under the Freedom of Information Act because the records in our custody do not include the information you requested."
As if it were his fault somehow for making an unreasonable request. Barry shook the tree again to see if anything else would fall out. This time he forwarded a new request, asking specifically for material only from the date of April 7th, 1964. This time a different archivist, perhaps empathetic with Barry's mission, sent him a picture contained within the files that hadn't been sent the first time. And it shed a little bit more light on the subject.
The pristine evidence in question was not only lost for eternity, but now Barry Ernest had been made aware of its exact fate. It read, "Report of proceedings held at Dallas, Texas, Tuesday, April 7, 1964. The date of testimony that is key to our entire story, and the status of its contents, stenotype tape, master sheets, carbon and waste, turned over to commission for destruction."
solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
That you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of your ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.